Hello everyone, welcome to our PMP exam questions and answer solving session for March. Now, if you are preparing for the PMP exam, you can use today's class to assess how well you are prepared for the exam, okay? So out of the 5 questions that we are going to solve today, the target will be to get all the 5 out of the 5 questions correct. However, the minimum expectation is that you should get at least 4 out of the 5 questions correct to consider yourself fairly well prepared for the PMP exam. Now, anything less than that, you might need a bit more preparation, okay? Also, if you are preparing for the PMP exam, you might want to check out my training courses on Udemy. And you can also consider to join my YouTube membership community. All of them are very well reviewed amongst the students like you, and I will provide all the details on how you can join the same later on in this video, okay? So give this video a like, get a pen and a paper, and let's get started with question number 1.
Right, so question number 1, guys, please read the question and try to answer it before we solve this together. You can pause the video here if you wish to. Right, so let's get started. A project manager is organizing a cross-functional meeting to align different departments on a major product launch, okay? So they need to choose a representative for their team to attend these meetings and provide updates. What criteria should the project manager consider when selecting the most suitable team representative, right? Now you see, guys, if there is a sort of a situation where you have a pretty significant cross-functional team, okay, and you need to sort of align things with the different departments, okay, just ask yourself the question that what kind of traits or what kind of behavioral skills you are looking at for one of your team members who you can trust with handling this kind of a situation, right? So the behavioral skill that we are looking at is primarily, let's say, team management, speaking and interacting with larger audience, a person who is willing to gel with a larger audience, right? These are the general traits which you will look at before you select a team member in this kind of a situation, right? Agreed? So with that premise, let's look at the answer options one by one. How well the team member understands the work of other departments. Okay, yeah, that is sort of reasonable, okay, because you need to select a team member who, of course, understands the work of the other department, because if the person doesn't have an understanding of how the other departments function and he or she is just there trying to put their own agenda, okay, or drive their own agenda, that might not serve your purpose. Okay, so option A seems like a reasonable option. Let's look at option B. How effectively the team member applies their expertise to the project. This is incorrect, right? Because even if the team member has a lot of expertise, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person will be a good team player, or that doesn't necessarily mean that the person will be able to represent your team in that cross-functional platform, right? So just being a subject matter expert doesn't necessarily give you the skill of managing a cross-functional meeting or representing a team in a cross-functional meeting. So option B is definitely incorrect. Let's look at option C. How persuasive the team member is when presenting information. Again, that is sort of a trait which you might say it's a good to have, but again, it's not like sort of a must have, right? So even if the person comes with a lot of persuasion skills or tries to put forward the agenda for your team, if he or she doesn't understand how the other team members are working, how the different departments are working, what are the sort of dependencies between the departments, etc., just having persuasion skills or negotiation skills will not help in this kind of a scenario. Okay, so that is why option C is incorrect. Let's look at option D. How long the team member has been involved with the company's projects. Again, this is very naive and very incorrect as well, because just spending more time with the company doesn't necessarily give you the skill that you are looking at this point of situation. So for example, if someone is a typographer, let's say, or does only type of desk jobs in terms of raising purchase orders or documenting stuff or doing minutes of meeting, etc., now that person might be in that role for, let's say, 10 years, which is a very long span. However, you can safely assume that will not give the necessary skills to that person to manage cross-functional meeting or represent your team in a cross-functional platform, right? So plain and simple. So that is why option D is also incorrect, and the correct answer to this question is option A, which is you should be trying to sort of select a person based on the consideration that how well this team member understands the work of other departments, because having that understanding is the key to sort of represent your team in that meeting or represent your team in that cross-functional platform, so that at least you become a inherent part of the overall project, or let's say the overall portfolio of the program that your project is a part of. Because if you do not understand how the other cross-functional teams or the other functions are performing, you will not be able to sort of bring synergies to the entire project, program, or portfolio. Okay, so the correct answer to this question is option A.
Now, if you are preparing for your PMP exam, guys, I would suggest that you check out my PMP exam preparation courses on Udemy. All the courses are very highly rated amongst the students, and many PMP aspirants like you have passed their PMP exam with the help of these courses. You can check the student reviews on Udemy, and all the links will be provided in the description section of this video in case you are interested to join. Okay, and now let's move on to question number 2.
Right, so question number 2, guys, please read the question and try to answer it before we solve this together. You can pause the video here if you wish to. Okay, so let's get started. After several sprints, the Agile team has experienced frequent scope changes due to evolving customer requirements and compliance updates. These changes have impacted the sprint velocity and the delivery timelines. Now, to prevent further disruptions, the Scrum Master suggests adjusting the approach for the upcoming sprint. So the question is, what should the Scrum Master do first? Okay. Now, if you sort of reflect on the overall project scenario that has been provided in this question, guys, you will see that the team here, the Agile team here, has experienced some sort of difficulty. Now, the Scrum Master is trying to sort of learn from that difficulty or learn from that experience and sort of take some corrective measures in the upcoming sprints, so that the new sprints doesn't face the similar sort of challenges, right? So what essentially is happening here is you are learning from experience and you are applying that experience in your future projects or sprints or iterations, right? So before you even go into the answer options, I have a question for you that you answer me. You can put your answer in the comment section, that what is that sort of agile ceremony that gives you the opportunity to reflect on your mistakes or challenges or whatever problems you have faced previously, plan some mitigation actions and apply them in your next sprint or iteration. Okay, the answer is retrospective. This kind of analysis, if you are able to do even before you're going ahead and trying to sort of evaluate the answer options. Now, I'm not saying that you sort of become biased that, okay, if my analysis is telling this, I should always look for some kind of a confirmation within the answer options to give me a sort of confidence that yes, my analysis was correct. Okay, so because that is a very naive way of solving questions. But having said that, it is equally important for you to analyze the scenario, okay, and ask the right questions and draw the correct inferences if you have a strong, solid foundation of the basic agile principles, right? So with that, let's look at the options one by one. Option A, prioritize and rank the most critical backlog items based on their impact and feasibility, then implement improvements identified in the last retrospective. Okay, now if we are looking at a scenario, or let's say if you are looking at a ceremony, let's say, I think that is the right word, where you look at your previous mistakes or previous challenges and you sort of then come and fix those, build some systemic measures for your future sprints. Which is the agile ceremony that gives you that opportunity? Outrightly, it is the sprint retrospective, right? So option A seems like a plausible option. Let's look at option B. Conduct a cost-benefit analysis to evaluate potential value of adopting new agile practices for better handling scope changes. Again, this is sort of quite absurd, right? Doing cost-benefit analysis. We are not talking about the cost versus benefit in this situation, right? We are essentially talking about some frequent scope changes, which sort of is causing issues with delivery and timelines in your sprint, right? So bringing in, or let's say force fitting cost benefit analysis in such a scenario seems like not the correct answer choice. Okay, so option B is definitely not the correct answer that we are looking at. Let's look at option C. Research agile frameworks and tools that have successfully managed frequent requirement changes in similar projects. Okay, now this is sort of a good sort of intellectualization, you can say that, but again, does it sort of something that you do first? Okay, this is very, very important that if you go to your question stem, it is asking that what should the Scrum Master do first, right? You do not sort of start doing a research as sort of your first step, right? Research is something that you do as maybe an improvement opportunity once you have sort of done the necessary mitigation actions once you are faced with a challenge, right? So option C might be okay once you have done the necessary fixes, but that is definitely not the first action which the Scrum Master should do. Let's look at option D. Facilitate a backlog refinement session, ensuring that customer feedback and compliance updates are incorporated into the upcoming sprint. Okay, now this is also a very close answer choice, right? So if you look at option D and option A, option D is mentioning that you facilitate a backlog refinement session, ensuring that customer feedback and compliance updates are incorporated in the upcoming sprints, which is totally fine, and you should definitely do that in such kind of a situation. However, this option, which is option D, is totally ignoring the sort of learn from experience aspect, right? Because backlog refinement can happen anyways, right? So that is something that you anyways need to do as part of your ongoing sprint or as part of your sort of an opening ceremony for the next sprint, etc. But going to the question stem, the question stem is giving you the direction that to prevent further disruptions, the Scrum Master suggests adjusting the approach for the upcoming sprint. Okay, now this is categorically trying to give you a hint that there is something within the scenario which you need to identify that will provide you with that aspect of learn from experience, right? And that is not something that option D is providing to you. Okay, and that is why option D is a very close answer choice, guys, but option D is definitely incorrect, and the correct answer to this question is option A, which is to prioritize and rank the most critical backlog items. Okay, now this is in fact backlog refinement, right? So I think option A is more comprehensive because it is talking about having the backlog refinement done first, right? Because backlog refinement is to prioritize and rank the most critical backlog items before you start your next sprint, right? So it is definitely capturing that aspect as well. On top of it, it is also capturing the aspect of learn from experience. However, option D captures one aspect of it, which is backlog refinement, but it does not necessarily capture the learn from experience aspect. So that is why option D is a very close answer choice, but incorrect. So the correct answer to this question is option A.
Now, before we move on to question number 3, guys, I would suggest that you check out my membership community on YouTube as part of your PMP exam preparation. I share daily posts on PMP exam tips, tricks, and strategies via this platform. It's a monthly subscription based service, okay, and you can cancel anytime you want to. All the links will be provided in the description section of this video, so please do check it out. Okay, and now let's move on to question number 3.
Okay, so question number 3, guys, please read the question and try to answer it before we solve this together. You can pause the video here if you wish to. Get started. A software development company faced repeated project delays due to slow delivery from an outsourced development team. Okay. So to accelerate the progress, the company switched to a new vendor. Okay, so the previous vendor or the previous supplier or let's say the previous partner to whom this project or part of this project was outsourced, they were sort of causing a lot of delays, and to accelerate the progress, the company incorporated a new supplier or a new vendor. However, 3 months later, the quality assurance team reports major defects in the delivered software. Okay, now the company probably was able to accelerate the schedule. Okay, however, they sacrificed on the quality. Okay, so typical cases which you generally see in project management as well, and I'm sure that you as a project manager has also experienced something very similar. Okay, so the project manager determines that the vendor change led to quality issues. Okay, as we were expecting that this change of contractor or change of supplier from, let's say, S1 to S2 probably led to an improvement in the schedule, but the quality suffered a lot. Okay, so how should the project manager prevent this issue in future projects? So let's look at the options one by one. Okay, now before we go into the options, an important thing to note here is the question is talking about how should the project manager prevent this issue in future projects. Okay, so it is not talking about some, let's say, firefighting or let's say a reactive fix, but it is more talking about a systemic fix, which will also help future projects to learn from this project. Okay, so let's look at the options one by one. Option A, update the risk information in the lessons learned register. Okay, so this is a very interesting option, guys. Okay, now while we were looking at the question stem, we sort of inferred that it is talking about something which will probably give a bit of learning from this project, which needs to be applied in future projects. And if you see lessons learned register as part of option A, you might as well think that, oh, here is the correct answer, right? However, I would go back to my original premise with which we solve all of these monthly Q&A sessions, that do not go with an instinctive choice of answers whilst you are solving PMP questions. Whichever answer option you are choosing, please try to evaluate the answer option word by word. Okay, so we'll come to option A in a second. Let's look at option B. Review the assumptions log to change or revisit current assumptions. Of course, this is incorrect, right? Because assumptions log is what? It is basically some of the assumptions with which you develop the project management plan or develop the project charter. It gets formed at the very early stages of the project, in the initiation or in the planning stage. Things like, let's say, taxation structure might be a part of the assumption. Assuming that, let's say, the economy of a country will not change whilst the project is progressing, like no major changes from taxation or corporate tax, etc., etc. So those can be an assumption. An assumption can be sort of the health and safety standards of the company, which needs to be adhered to whilst you are doing the project. Okay, so these are kind of assumptions, and it is a bit irrelevant in this kind of a scenario which has been provided in the question. Okay, let's look at option C. Assess new risks and update the probability impact matrix. Okay, this is also incorrect because this is a bit vague, right? Assess new risks. I understand that. Okay, you need to assess new risk, but what about this risk? Okay, how is this answer option relevant to give me confidence that you are putting in some systemic fixes that will take care of similar kind of risks as part of the project scenario that has been given, right? And why update only the probability impact matrix, right? Why not update the risk register? Okay, so these kind of questions are open-ended, which answer option C does not cater to. That is why option C is incorrect. Let's look at option D. Ensure that an implemented risk response is effective. Okay, this is also a plausible option because once you sort of plan a risk response, it is very important for you to monitor that risk response as well for its efficacy, right? Because otherwise every risk response might look very enticing, or let's say very effective on a piece of paper, but it is not until when the rubber will hit the road that you will realize that the risk response that you have sort of prepared is not good enough, right? So it is very important to ensure that an implemented risk response stays effective while it is getting implemented. So for example, in this scenario, when the old contractor, or let's say the old supplier, was causing project delays, of course, one of the risk response was that, okay, get on board a new supplier who can deliver things faster. Okay, now was it effective? Probably not. Okay, because even if you sort of mitigated the risk of schedule, however, you introduced a new risk of quality by switching from the previous supplier to this supplier. Okay, so in this kind of a situation, you need to keep in mind that it is not only important to plan a risk response, but also to implement the risk response properly and monitor it as well. Okay, so that is why answer option D also looks like a possible answer choice for this question. So that leaves us with either option A or option D as the correct answer choice. Okay, now, if we go back to option A, guys, and let's study the answer option word by word, okay? And when I say word by word, I mean word by word, right? So update the risk information in the lessons learned register. Okay, now what is risk information? It can mean a lot of things, right? It can mean the actual risk. It can mean the sort of financial impact the risk has caused. It can mean the mitigation response, etc., etc. Only updating the risk information in the lessons learned register probably will not prevent these kind of issues in future projects, because if that implemented risk response is ineffective, it will not sort of give you that confidence that if you are still documenting that as part of your risk response, and you are documenting it as part of your risk information, that is something which is a bit vague, and it will not also give the project manager the confidence that yes, this is something that the team should ideally learn from and reapply in future projects. Okay, because risk information can mean a lot of things related to the risk. Okay, however, if you go back to option D, It specifically talks about the implemented risk response. Okay, so that is something which is very, very crucial and is quite inherent to the problem that we are trying to address as part of this question. Okay, so that is why option A falls apart, because updating the risk information in the lessons learned register is sort of quite exploratory, okay, or quite broad in terms of ensuring that this will prevent the issue in future projects. Okay, so that is why option A is incorrect, guys, and the correct answer to this question is option D, which is to ensure that an implemented risk response is effective, and that itself is a learning that could be captured as part of your lessons learned. Okay, risk information as a term is very, very broad in this context, and that is why option A is incorrect, but it's a very close answer choice, guys. Okay, so the correct answer to this question is option D.
Now, before we move on to question number 4, guys, make sure you do subscribe to my channel PMP with Ray for more such videos like this for your PMP exam preparation. Okay, your support really helps educational channels like this to grow on YouTube. And now let's move on to question number 4.
Right, so question number 4, guys, please read the question and try to answer it before we solve this together. Right, so let's get started. A multinational IT project involves teams from 4 different regions, a governance board, and a key client representative. Okay, so as the project nears completion, the project manager must ensure that all the necessary approvals are obtained for project closure. Okay, so there is a multinational IT project that's happening across 4 different regions. There is a steering committee or a governance board, and there is a key client representative. Okay, now the project is nearing completion and the project manager should ensure that all the necessary approvals, okay, the scope validation part is obtained for project closure. So the question is, who should provide the final approval for the acceptance of project deliverables? Now this should be quite straightforward, guys, if you have gone through your process group practice guide. If you know that who is sort of the R which is responsible in your RACI matrix when it comes to accepting the project deliverable. Okay, because the person who is the R is the person who is the final authority for approval, because that is the person who will be responsible for accepting those project deliverables once the project closure happens. Okay, so let's look at the answer options one by one. Option A, the sponsor should provide the final approval. Okay, so probably at this point, let me flip the screen and let me show you the necessary section from the process group practice guide, which will help you to answer this question in less than 30 seconds. Okay. Right, so I'm in my process group practice guide at the moment and I'm on page 201. And if you go to this part, which is the accepted deliverables, look what it mentions, right? So it mentions that products, results, or capabilities produced by a project and validated by the project customer or sponsors as meeting their specific acceptance criteria. Plain and simple. Okay, so the R, or the responsible person for accepting project deliverables, is either your project customer or your project sponsor. That's it. Okay, so you need not to brainstorm or you need not over analyze this simple piece of information that has already been provided as part of your process group practice guide. And again, that is the reason it is very important for you to go through your process group practice guide, go through the various project artifacts and understand that who is the final approver for each of those project artifacts. Okay, so if you have that piece of information, you already know that the correct answer to this question is option A, because the sponsor should provide the final approval. Because here there is of course a client representative, but none of the options does mention the client representative, right? Because if it was not the sponsor, it would have been the client representative who should have been providing the final approval. But anyways, let's look at the options B, C, and D as well. Governance board, incorrect. Okay, should be responsible for signing of deliverables. That's incorrect. Regional team, incorrect. Okay, for locations, okay, quite preposterous. Okay, and finally, all relevant stakeholders involved in the project should provide their approval. Okay, that is incorrect as well, because imagine the sort of complexity it will cause for the project manager if he or she is supposed to take approval of the project deliverable from all the stakeholders involved in the project. And when in a situation where the project is like spanning across various geographies, right? It is totally something which is not practical, right? So that is why option D is also incorrect. And the correct answer to this question is option A, i.e. the sponsor who should be providing the final approval to the project deliverables. And if you go back to your process group practice guide, page number 201, as we have seen as part of solving this question, it is explicitly stated in your process group practice guide that who should be the one approving the final deliverables of a project as part of the project closure process. Okay, so the correct answer to this question is option A.
I hope you are finding this exercise helpful, right? Remember, the target is to get all the 5 out of the 5 questions correct. However, the minimum expectation is that you should get at least 4 out of the 5 questions correct, right? So here comes the 5th and the final question.
Right, so question number 5, guys, the drill will remain the same. Please read the question and try to answer it before we solve this together. You can pause the video here if you wish to. Okay, so let's get started. A software company is facing delays in product releases due to extensive feature development. Okay, to improve time to market, the Agile team is asked to focus on restricting the number of features of the product and release a version more quickly to the market. So essentially, we are talking about an MVP, or the minimum viable product. Okay. Now, please don't jump into the conclusion that, okay, if I see MVP in option B is the correct answer. Okay, because that will be a very silly thing to do. Please don't do that. Okay. Analyzing the question is one thing, and going ahead and assessing the answer options and identifying the correct answer option based on that analysis is a very separate skill. Okay, so do not jump into conclusions whilst you are analyzing the question. Okay, so we are still at the analysis stage of the question scenario. Okay, so what is happening here in the question scenario is a software company is facing delays in product releases due to an extensive feature development. Now, to improve the time to market, okay, of the product, the Agile team has been asked to focus on restricting the number of features, or probably selecting the number of features which makes more sense for the product and for the customer, and release a version more quickly to the market. Now, of course, this concept is called MVP, or the minimum viable product, but we need to see whether option B actually fits the bill in terms of really answering the question, which is how will this request impact sprint planning? Let's look at the options one by one. Option A, the backlog will be refined to prioritize core functionality in smaller manageable increments. Okay, very smart, guys, because option A, what it is trying to do is it is still giving you the core concept of MVP, which is to prioritize the core functionality into smaller manageable increments. Okay, but it is providing the backlog refinement as a proposed solution, and this is a very strong option, guys, because until and unless you do a backlog refinement, you will not be able to identify which of the features you want to restrict and which of the features you do not want to restrict. Okay, you will not be able to prioritize if you do not do a solid backlog refinement session. Okay, and once that prioritization is done, you can incorporate that into your feature planning as part of smaller manageable increments, which is essentially the MVP. So option A is a very strong answer choice. Let's look at option B. The product vision will be adjusted to align with a MVP focused release strategy. Okay, now those of you who have just selected this option, seeing that there is an MVP here mentioned in this answer option, it is a incorrect answer choice, guys. Okay, because product vision is something which you do not touch at the drop of the hat. Okay, it is very let's say sacrosanct when it comes to any project, because the product vision is the holy grail for which the project or the program or the portfolio even, right, exists. So you do not touch the product vision until and unless it is absolutely the last thing you touch. Okay, now that is the first reason. And secondly, even if let's say you are doing an MVP for the first release, that doesn't mean that you will still keep on doing MVPs for the future releases as well. Okay, so the product vision need not change. Okay, because the product vision might not now say that, okay, since one of my sprints have been delayed, I will sort of do a product vision of MVP after MVP, even if I don't need it, right? I hope you get my point, because product vision is very, very sacrosanct. And if we are talking about a particular sprint or a particular iteration, it makes sense to focus your time and energy to refine the backlog within that iteration of the sprint into sort of designing that sprint to deliver a MVP rather than going ahead and changing the product vision. It's like saying, if we draw parallels to a waterfall type project as well, that okay, if one of your tasks which are on critical path, it is delayed and you need to sort of do a crashing or a fast tracking on that task, you go ahead and change the project charter, right? So that will not happen, right? And you don't do that. So that is why option B, even if it has the term MVP, is an incorrect answer choice. Okay, so do not jump into selecting answer choices which might trick you in terms of having those sort of enticing terms, or having those terms which you are looking for, and still sort of sandwiching those terms in a completely incorrect answer choice. Okay, so please evaluate the answer choices in totality before you take a decision whether it is correct or incorrect. Okay, so let's look at option C. The sprint backlog will be reorganized to emphasize the simplest user stories first. Now this also could have been the correct answer choice, but the problem here is the simplest user stories might not be the necessary user stories you need to execute as part of the MVP. Okay, now of course, let's say user story 1, 2, and 3 might be very simple to execute, but that doesn't mean that user story 1, 2, and 3 will be part of the first release version or the MVP. Okay, so that is a very, very bold, or let's say tangential assumption to make. Okay, that the simplest user stories will form part of my MVP. Might be the case, might not be the case. That is why answer option C is also incorrect. And let's look at the final answer choice. The scope of each increment will be minimized to facilitate faster iterations and quicker releases. So basically it is asking you to cut scope, right? Which is totally incorrect. You cannot cut scope just like that to expedite the project schedule. Okay, so that is not something you do. If you have to expedite this project schedule, what you do, you basically do value engineering, right? So MVP is a sort of value engineering, right, which you do as part of an agile project. You do not go and start cutting scope outrightly. So that is why option D is also incorrect. And the correct answer to this question is option A, which is to refine the backlog, which is called the backlog refinement or backlog prioritization, to prioritize the core functionality in smaller manageable increments. And this phrase is basically your MVP in the end. Okay, so the correct answer to this question is option A.
So that's the end of the quiz, guys. Let me know in the comment section below how much you were able to score, okay? I'd be very, very interested to know that. Also, if you have scored less, please do not be demotivated, okay? You just need a bit more preparation. Do a thorough analysis of your mistakes so that you get to know about your knowledge gaps and you are able to fix those on time, okay? Thank you for watching, and I will see you again next month with another session on PMP exam practice questions and answers. Have a nice day and bye for now.